What's up, Hobby Maniacs? Rob Bear here today with a look at the new Horus Heresy Model Masterclass Volume 1. Interesting book. I got a lot of things to say. I'm sure we're going to get off on a lot of tangents on this one because it's a really interesting kind of look at how they do their things. But I got a couple thoughts on the matter, and I don't want to sound too overly negative, but there's definitely some positives and there's some pros and some cons to this book. It's a little interesting kind of thing. It's not exactly what I thought it was going to be, but I'm trying to kind of temper that with some constructive criticism, and also, as best of a review I can do here on the book. But before we get to all that, make sure you stay in the trenches. Click on the Patreon link, help keep our videos ad-free in 2016, and see what kind of swag you can pick up for free this week by doing so. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, check out the blog, spikybitsblog.com, and head on over to thelongwar.net. That's the home of the battle reports for exclusive content, early access videos, and more. Become a veteran of the Long War today. So like I was saying, it's a really interesting book. First off, there's only 3 tutorials in here. It's the Styrex right here, the Falchion, and the Draconin, the Solar Auxiliary Transport. There is no tutorial in here on Horus. Now, granted, they didn't say there was, but when you put something like that on the cover, maybe you're kind of gonna think that way. It's about a 100-page book. Retails for £30, so I guess that's about $45 US. Plus, now Forge World's charging sales tax. I had to pay $17.50 sales tax on my 250-pound order here in the States. So that's kind of interesting. That's a whole nother topic to talk about. Additionally, I had to pay additional international fees for using my credit card. So maybe I'll use PayPal next time. I don't know if they're gonna be part of that as well. So something that cost £250 actually ended up costing about 200 and upwards of 277. I guess it was they charged in dollars, so it didn't cost quite as much as it sounded out to be, but it's still an extra $25 US, give or take. But it was a little frustrating because I hadn't seen that before. Maybe that's a thing for the new year, maybe that's a thing for the new website, don't know. Anywho, so here they talk about that there's tutorials on the Styrex, the Falchion, and the Dracosin. They also show you how they made some of the terrain boards, which is really cool looking, but they don't really get into, they're like, hey, we casted this, and hey, we did this, and hey, we did that. Not exactly stuff that are, open to people like you and me to just walk off the street and be like, yo, my Forge World model maker, spin me up some molds for these walls. You know what I mean? So, like, I kind of dig it, and it's really cool to see because I don't feel like we've seen that content before. I was a little disappointed at the same time, too, because I'm like, yo, I could never do that. I would have to buy all the city fight kits and to even replicate something similar. And then they have a whole bunch of galleries on some of the Primarchs, and then just some of the overall, their legions as well. Little feature fold out on Horus and the Sons of Horus Legion as well, which I was a little disappointed by that too, because it seems like there was a bunch of different paint styles involved in that, but they don't really go over them. So I was like, okay, all right, cool. We'll jump into it here. My overall review of the book, I think for a lot of people, it is a Forge World Masterclass, air quotes, Masterclass book, right? So you expect to see some advanced techniques and things like that. A lot of the stuff they're going to showcase in this book are things that are going to take a lot of time, to be quite honest. This isn't your Baylor tabletop quality stuff. There's a lot of tips and tricks that you can kind of take from your hobby arsenal to make some of this stuff a little bit quicker, but overall, you're talking about a project that could last months, maybe even years, and some people want that, but some people maybe want to get their stuff painted up, at least on the tabletop. With the new Calth Marines that have come out, it's really great to get that stuff put together and painted, and that isn't what this book is. This is a masterclass book, and I had to keep reminding myself as I read it. I'm like, yo, that's such a waste of time. This is such a waste of time. This takes forever, et cetera, et cetera. But then I was like, okay, this is a masterclass book. I get it. I get what they're doing. But, overall, I think realistically, for a lot of us out there, this isn't a realistic way to paint or to hobby for a lot of us, unless you just want to buy that one kit and work on it for a year. This book is for y'all. But that being said, there is some techniques in here, too, that I feel like are really good, and that you can add to your hobby arsenal. Personally, I feel like I got more out of watching YouTube videos than I did this book, to be quite honest. Especially, Kenny's stuff over on Next Level Painting, or just, sitting there talking to him over, the years that I've known him and stuff. I've gotten a lot more than this book. I feel like, and you know, maybe that's me just being biased. I don't know, but I definitely feel like this book, and they leave some stuff out. Like they leave steps out. Like the very first thing. And here's the contents here. Like I said, it was about a 100 page book. You get your 3 tutorials here, and that just goes into, so basically from roughly page 50-ish on, about half the book is just kind of like a showcase. With brief, they're like, hey, we use this to make this, and here's this recipe for this, but they don't show you kind of how to do it. They show you how to do Ferrus Manus's metal hands, but that's pretty much it there. So about half the book is actually just, I mean, quasi filler, to be quite honest. You're buying a tutorial book, a masterclass book, and it's like half filler. So a little disappointing there. Right off the bat, I love the SteerX tutorial. I think it's great. They give you some solid advice here with the corks, very cool stuff, and then the pre-shading. And the pre-shading is really cool because you use those complementary colors together, and then when you hit it with the red, you're good to go, right? Like you get this really brilliant popping red that really accents well with the greens you used. And green is definitely one of the accent colors, you know, the complementary colors to red, along with, you know, like purples and some browns and things like that. But then again, this tutorial was basically in a previous masterclass book, you know, the one on doing the Reaver Titan. So I was kind of disappointed in that regard, because I'm like, yo, we've already seen how to do red. Like that was in a book like, you know, 5 years ago or whatever. But still some solid advice. They're like, hey, tape off your stuff. Here's how to do the cracks. But another thing too that I noticed was it seems like they were missing steps, or they omitted a few things here and there. Because, you know, if you look at this particular diagram right here, I feel like they left some stuff out. Like they like painted it, then they taped it off, you know, but they left all the cracks in here, right? They painted all the trim, and then they go back and paint the trim, and they airbrush over it again. But they don't tell you that in here, and I'm just like, why would you do that? It just seems like a waste of time, you know what I mean? So it's a little frustrating as I read it. I'm just like, I'm trying to compare the pictures, and I'm trying to really follow along, and some of it doesn't really follow. Like here, for instance, you can see that they attach the feet to the base, and then they get into making the base, and they don't tell you, well, I guess it's in the back here. They basically break the model off the base so you can figure out where the feet go, right? But they don't tell you that in the tutorial. So like if you're not really paying attention, you're like, well, how do I line up the feet? Do I do it? And then if you follow along, you've already painted the model, and now you're like, well, I have this painted model, and then if you do it this way, it just doesn't seem to make sense. It's a little, it's just frustrating. Like if they had just put in a section of instruction about it, it would have been great. I really like this heating effect tutorial right here as well. But like I said, stuff like this is over on Kenny's channel. You know, he did this a year or so ago with the glaive actually itself. So it's a very similar actually model. So I was kind of like, okay, well, there's some cool techniques in here that I might not have known. So other folks might not have known unless you're watching, you know, some of these YouTube channels and hitting up some of these articles. This particular tape right here, they just tell you to use masking tape. And I'm like, yo, if you use masking tape, just straight up masking tape, you're gonna peel all the work you did right off the model. They don't tell you to use the low tack painter's tape. So right there is a huge problem for me, because you're telling people how to do all of this work, and then you don't tell them the one little thing that's going to ruin all the work they did. And that right there was super frustrating for me. But again, there's some really cool tips and techniques in here, like, you know, how to shade metal, just going from basically doing washes and things like that, not doing the actual airbrush, you know, the cutbacks and things, which is a kind of a really cool alternative. They tell you how to weather, you know, all this different types of metal right here on the head. They also show you how to freehand, but again, this is a skill level thing. This isn't for everybody, you know, freehanding all this heraldry pads. So a little frustrating on this tutorial. They also don't come back and show you how to finish up weathering on all this, but I figure they show you how to do it on the faceplate. So, you know, they're like, well, hey, you know how to do it now, but they don't give you that text. They're not like, hey, so now to finish up the model, do this and this, apply these techniques to this area, or even just taking this diagram and being like, yeah, page whatever, page whatever, page whatever, page whatever, because you get to here and you're like, holy crap, I'm on page 22, and how did they get to all this? You know what I mean? Like, so I could see where people would be a little frustrated, and I'm just like, okay, all right, well, I'll go to the next one. I'll go to Falcia. Great looking model, very well done. I mean, look at this model. I think it won a Golden Demon actually too. There's, you know, this is an amazing looking model, very a myriad of techniques going on here, right? And again, they show you a lot of this stuff, but they also omit a few things that I think, is kind of frustrating, to be quite honest. Like, they don't give you like the mixes. Like, first of all, they show you how to base coat. Also, they're using the Iwata Eclipse HPCL, which is a really great airbrush. It pushes acrylics like nobody else's business. It like is the acrylic ender. It can push just about anything you push through it. And it's a great airbrush in that regard. Grex has some really great airbrushes too. So if you're definitely super serious about airbrushing, I recommend definitely picking up that brush, or I think Grex has I forget exactly which one it is. It's like a GL or a GP. Get the 0.35 millimeter head. That one does work. It'll do really well for you. I guarantee it. But that being said, so they show you how to base coat, and then they start getting into some other areas here. They show you how to do this shading and translucency mix, which is basically just cutting it back with like an orange brown, which is kind of what I would do personally. But they don't really get into all that. They're just like, hey, make this mix. And they don't tell you the exact, like, they're like, this color was made using this with some of this. Okay, well, how much are we talking here? Like, I realize, again, it's a masterclass book, and I can really appreciate all the techniques and things they're showing here. But at the end of the day, people might be buying this and not even have a basic understanding of airbrushing. So maybe giving the exact precise mixes, which they do in a lot of other areas, but I feel like this was kind of a faux pas, because you do all this yellow, and then they're like, hey, just mix this with this, and they don't give you the specific recipes. Then you might not be able to duplicate those results. It was a little frustrating for me to kind of see that. I'm like, okay, well, what's the mix? They don't tell you. All right, well, I can tell you what right now, and I'm sure a lot of you that are using an airbrush, getting the exact mixes down and things is sometimes it's time consuming, because you're too soupy or you're too thick and it doesn't push. So for them to just be like, hey, you just make this mix and then you spray it, I'm just like, well, that's kind of confusing, because you might not be able to just spray it. Again, the effects are beautiful. The streaking, the advice going, from the top to the bottom, and things like that. I mean, it's very well done here. But you could just grab, a Reaper color like Reaper Harvest Brown, or start with a Reaper Orange Brown and put the yellow over top of it, and you would get the same effect. Now, granted, that's not the Forge World paints, so that's not the life they're about. But that's just that's just me saying that. Now here, I mean, this literally looks like they're using regular masking tape. And I don't know if it's a special tape or not, but again, you use a regular masking tape on a model like this, it's gonna pull up when you remove it. And it's just, I really hate to see people like, ruining the work they've done, because they are not, it's not, they basically don't tell you that in here, you know what I mean? So it was a little frustrating there. I do like the techniques, where they're like, hey, this is how you block stuff off, and that's great. And I definitely liked on the Sterex where they go in and they're like, hey, use a blade to cut your stuff and get that really clean edge. And then they tell you how to basically go back and fix your oversprays, right? But let me tell you what, fixing, they're like, once the masking tape was removed, areas of overspray where the masking had failed were then corrected using the original yellow base color. Well, let me tell you what, there is nothing harder, maybe white, to go over black than yellow. Like that right there, that little part would just take forever to fix. Like, just going back in with yellow, going back in with yellow, going back in with yellow, going back in with yellow. So I feel like maybe, hey guys, don't put those fuel takes on, because we know that we're going to get overspray on it. We'll paint those separate and then glue them on later. That would have been a suitable alternative instead of doing all of this right here. But again, that comes with the time consuming part. Do you want to make this your hobby project, or do you want to just get this done in a week and get it on the tabletop? If you want to do the latter, well, don't glue stuff like this on, because you're going to have a hard time keeping it clean and going back and repainting it a million times. So then they get into some other details and some things like that. They also recommend using eyeshadow applicators, which is a great tip. I definitely love it. I love what they're doing there. I love how they talk about that. I think it's a very good idea, and to go back in and weather your stuff there. Then they get into using the what is it, the rust powders. And another technique that's going to be also very time consuming is they recommend shading the entire thing with a wash, all of the yellows, right? And here it is right here, and they're like, yeah, just go in and do a panel at a time. That's also, it's very hard to do that because they recommend using a hairdryer and always making sure you have the surfaces horizontal. So yes, if you have a hairdryer and you're holding your tank in one hand, you're brushing in one hand, and then you're grabbing a hairdryer in another hand, you can probably manipulate it a lot, but again, that's a whole time thing. Just getting a thin, using multiple applications of a thin down glaze might be a better alternative for folks just trying to get stuff on the tabletop. So that's just my 2 cents right there, obviously, but it's just definitely how I feel. As soon as I read it, I'm like, well, I could do that easier. I did like their tip about the Zambezi desert, that they basically water it down a little bit and kind of blow it all over these lower surfaces here and go back with black and lightly dry brush to make it look like, the dust is like kind of falling off. I definitely dug that particular thing right there. Then they get into weathering powders for the treads themselves, which is a really great idea, but again, very super time consuming. You can almost do the same effect with doing some airbrush, like hitting with some browns, going back and splotching in Rise of Rust. Even Agrax Earthshade, if you really, not Agrax Earthshade, the Typhus Corrosion, and then hitting Rise of Rust on top of that, you can really get that done in like half the time as messing around with powders and stuff. But again, powders are a masterclass kind of thing, so I would expect that from this book. And then it gets into even more detail, and I really like this. Check this out. They cut these little plastic strips that size up with the viewports, and then they airbrush those separately, right? So you get that sick fade, and you don't have to do like half the work, which besides just gluing in a piece of plastic card. Well, now while it would take longer to actually brush that by hand than to actually figure out the sizes and cut the little viewports from a piece of plastic card, I can tell you what, that is a solid effect, and it looks really good. And that is a cool tip that I'm going to take back to my hobby arsenal, because that was something really cool right there. So then there's the completed, model, and it looks great. I don't want to take anything away from this thing, but again, this is something that won a Golden Demon. It took forever to do, but you can still replicate a lot of the techniques and details, using a little bit quicker methods, I feel like. And again, be careful with your masking tapes. You want to make sure you get a low tack one. And then it gets into the Dracosin, which is great. And then some of the detail on how they did some of these dioramas and things, like, here's your assembly line technique. We definitely talk about that on Spiky Bits, and also Kenny talks about it on Next Level Painting. He was probably the one that introduced me to it. And then it shows, basically how they made the dioramas. There's the Drop Site Massacre one. Basically, all the different techniques and things, like they cast those up. Those aren't something you can buy. It's cool to see, but it's a little sad that stuff like that is nothing that we could ever get. And then it's a great, very a great look at some of the studio stuff. Some great bigger pictures of things. There's the how-to on Ferrus Manus' hands. The taking of the Contrador during the fall conflict, where the Iron Warriors and the Imperial Fist went at it. Very cool looking board, but again, stuff like this was casted up by the Forge World team. It's cool, and I'm really awesome to see it, but it's nothing like me and you could ever do. We'd have to make it out of like plastic card and things, kind of like what they did right here to kind of start it out. But then all of this gets blocked in with actual, Forge World sculpts. So it's pretty amazing stuff once you look through it. But then when you realize that half the book was just basically a kind of like a gallery, it's a little depressing. Now, granted, the book's only $45 US. It's less than a codex, so you can't really complain that much, I feel like. But also, I feel like you can get more out of some of those YouTube channels out there than you can this book. But if you want to see, if you're serious about painting, it's serious about hobbying, and Golden Demons and a higher quality than tabletop, this is the book for you. But just remember, take a pinch of salt, apply some common sense to some of these techniques so you don't get got in that regard, because I would hate to see anybody spend that much time on anything and then ruin it because there was a step or a technique left out, or just a detail omitted. You know what I mean? So overall, I think it's a great book. With those caveats aside, for me, it was a little depressing. It was not what I expected, and I was trying to keep an open mind about it, and hopefully it didn't kind of come through on the video too negatively, but because it wasn't exactly what I expected. But that being said, it is a great book. $45 US. You really can't complain about the content you get in here. Just be aware that it might not be all of the content that you expect in that regard. So that's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching.
Deleted scenes, bonus content, and all the interviews and post-game wrap-up videos can be located in the Hall of Veterans on thelongwar.net. Visit thelongwar.net today and try a week completely free with no strings attached. That's not all. Thelongwar.net is also your hobby resource for exclusive early access with an ad-free experience to all your favorite videos. Members of the Hall of Veterans gain early exclusive access to multiple hobby videos.